Jack Harlan, a broke veteran, thought he'd inherited nothing but a dead sunflower field in Kansas. But when his loyal dog Scout unearthed something buried beneath the old well, Jack uncovered a secret his uncle had died protecting, and a truth that could heal poisoned land. If you love stories of redemption and loyalty, make sure to like and subscribe for the full journey. Dust swirled across the platform as Jack Harlan stepped off carrying the same olive-green duffel from Iraq, his clothes still carrying the faint scent of shelters and rain-soaked wool. Scout trotted beside him, a lean German shepherd with graying fur along his muzzle and eyes that had seen too much of the same world Jack had tried to forget. The wind here was different. It didn't howl like it did in the city. It whispered. The kind of whisper that could make a man remember who he used to be. The letter from the county clerk was still folded in his jacket pocket, creased and sweat-stained estate of Robert Harlan. Property located in Sumner County, Kansas. 40 acres of farmland unoccupied. A place Jack hadn't seen since he was a boy. He didn't remember much about his uncle except that he smelled like tobacco and engine oil and spoke in half sentences. But the man had left him everything, or what was left of everything. A dead field, a house falling in on itself, and apparently a dog claws that the clerk had found amusing. The property and the animal upon it are to remain together. The pickup that waited for him was older than he was, its paint dulled to the color of bone. Jack turned the key, the engine coughed, and Scout leapt into the passenger seat like it was still a Humvee. They drove through the open country in silence. The road unfurled beneath them, lined by telephone poles that leaned like tired soldiers. It was early spring, but the fields on both sides looked scorched, stripped of green. When the mailbox appeared Harlan Farm, barely legible beneath layers of rust, Jack slowed. The gate hung crooked, a single chain looped through it. Beyond the land spread wide and hollow. Once it had been gold with sunflowers, or so the neighbors said. Now it was nothing but brittle stems and cracked soil. He parked in front of the farmhouse. A Scout jumped out first, nose to the ground, tail stiff. The air carried a dry sweetness, the ghost of crops that had forgotten how to grow. Jack's boots crunched on the gravel. He took in the silence, the kind that didn't welcome you, just waited. The porch sagged under his weight. The front door stuck before giving way with a groan that echoed through the emptiness. Inside, the air smelled of old wood mildew and a faint trace of diesel. Furniture, covered in sheets, stood like ghosts frozen mid-conversation. A coffee tin sat on the table inside it, the keys and the will. Jack unfolded the paper again, reading the last lines. Do not sell the land. Do not destroy the well. It's the heart of this place. He frowned. The heart of this place, his uncle had never been poetic. If the man said something was the heart, it was because it worked, or used to. Jack stepped out to the porch, scanned the field, and spotted the old water tower at the edge of the property, its pipe drooping like a snapped limb. He walked toward it, Scout pacing behind him. The closer he got, the more the air smelled of rust and something faintly metallic. The pump was gone. Only the foundation remained, bolts sticking out like broken teeth. Jack crouched, running his hand along the dry pipe. The metal was still warm from the sun, but there was no sign of water. So that's it, huh? He muttered. You sold the veins to save your heart. Scout whined softly, nose brushing his arm. Jack sat back on his heels, staring across the field where thousands of flowers used to turn their faces toward the sun. All that was left were thin stalks rattling in the wind, the color of ash. A man could go mad trying to fix what time had already claimed. But the will's words stuck to him like a splinter. It's the heart of this place. Maybe that was what soldiers did after the war, try to find the pulse in things everyone else declared dead. He stood brushing the dust from his palms. Guess it's you and me, boy, he said. Scout's tail thumped once. They walked the length of the property, the last light bleeding orange over the hills. Jack stopped by the barn, pushed the door open, and found rows of empty seed bags stacked in a corner, each labeled Helianthus annuus Sunfield Hybrid. He picked one up, the smell of old dirt clinging to it. A few seeds rattled inside, dry but still whole. He poured them into his palm. small black teardrops against his calloused skin. "You ever seen a dead thing come back, Scout?" he asked. The dog tilted his head. Jack smiled faintly. Didn't think so. He pocketed the seeds anyway. That night he slept on the floor near the fireplace, the sound of wind sifting through broken panes. The dog lay by the door, ears twitching at every creak. Jack couldn't tell if it was the house settling or the past getting comfortable again. Somewhere outside, a loose shutter flapped against the siding, beating like a tired heart. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running from something, just standing still long enough to let it catch him. The next morning came thin and cold sunlight, barely pushing through the film of clouds over Kansas. Jack stood at the edge of the old well sleeves, rolled up the air, carrying the smell of rust and damp earth. The wind made the pump handle creak like it still remembered being useful. He pulled the rusted pipe free, twisting until his palms burned. Scout sat a few feet away, ears perked, tail sweeping the dirt in slow, deliberate strokes. "It's just us, partner," Jack murmured. The metal groaned as he pried loose the last coupling, and suddenly the end of the pipe came free with a wet, suctioning sound. A splash of dark water hit his boots, thick and foul-smelling, the kind of rot that didn't belong to nature. Scout barked once, sharp and low, and then his paws began digging furiously at a patch near the well's edge. "Easy," Jack said, but the dog wouldn't stop. His claws hit something solid with a dull clang. Jack knelt beside him, brushing away the mud until a corner of metal appeared. It was a small box no larger than a lunch tin, sealed tight with a band of corroded steel. Jack frowned, wiping grime from the lid. There was no label, no name, just the faint imprint of numbers barely visible under the rust, 1998. He carried it to the porch, pried it open with a screwdriver, and the lid gave way with a crack that echoed in the hollow yard. Inside lay a small 8mm film reel wrapped in wax paper, and beneath it a weathered notebook bound in cracked leather. Jack turned the pages carefully. The handwriting was his uncle's neat, meticulous, deliberate. Dates, measurements, small sketches of the field layout, all methodical like the man himself. He stopped at the last page. The ink there was darker, heavier, written with a shaking hand. "If anyone asks about this field, tell them the water died." Jack stared at the words until they blurred. He flipped through the rest, scanning for something, anything that made sense. Most of the notes referred to samples, readings, and levels. A few pages had chemical symbols he didn't understand, though one word repeated more than any other contamination. He placed the notebook aside and unrolled the film. Against the light from the kitchen window, faded images appeared, his uncle standing in the field, surrounded by men in coveralls, some holding metallic rods, others taking readings from a small device set into the ground. It wasn't farming. It was something scientific, maybe experimental. Jack felt a cold ripple run through him. His uncle had never been the type to work with scientists. He'd barely trusted doctors. "What were you into, old man?" Jack muttered. Scout whined softly, eyes fixed on the box. Jack gave the dog's head a small pat, but his mind was already far away, replaying the last conversation he'd had with his uncle before leaving for Iraq. The old man had said, "Don't come back here looking for something that isn't yours yet." At the time, Jack thought he meant money. Maybe he meant something buried deeper. By late afternoon, the sky turned gray and heavy. Jack carried the box back to the well. He looked down into the shaft, a dark throat of silence. He dropped a pebble and waited. The sound that came back wasn't a splash, but a hollow clatter, like the earth coughing dust. Scout leaned close to the edge, nose twitching. "No water," Jack said quietly. Maybe he was right. Maybe the water did die. He sat down on the rim, wiped his hands on his jeans, and felt the dirt crumble under his fingertips, dry, lifeless, brittle. The field pressed on him with its silence, and he tried to picture it alive again, sunflowers, turning toward his uncle, proud, beneath a forgiving sky. He glanced toward the barn where the bags of seeds still sat. An impulse, small but persistent, stirred in his chest. Jack fetched a tin bucket from the kitchen, set it beneath the gutter, and waited as the drizzle turned to rain. When it filled halfway, he carried it to the patch near the porch where Scout had unearthed the first seeds. The soil looked thirsty cracks running like veins across its surface. Jack poured the water slowly, watching it vanish into the earth almost instantly. Scout lowered his head and licked at the mud. Jack smiled faintly. "If the water's dead," he said, "we'll teach it how to breathe again." He pressed his palm against the wet ground, the cool grit seeping into his skin. Behind him, the wind carried the faintest scent of rain and iron. The sound of the dripping bucket echoed against the barn, steady and patient. The kind of rhythm that made a man believe the earth was still listening. He stood there for a long time, hand resting on the soil until the sky darkened and the last light caught on the rusted rim of the well. The rain from the night before had left the air damp and cool. Jack walked the dirt road toward the next property, a thermos of black coffee in one hand. A Scout pacing beside him, the leash dragging loosely. The neighbor's place sat low against the horizon, a tidy farmhouse with a windmill still turning lazy circles above it. Walt Bruner stepped out onto his porch as Jack approached, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. He was tall, wiry, with white hair cropped close and eyes the color of dried corn husks. "Well, I'll be," he said slowly. "Didn't think I'd see another Harlan out here." Jack managed a faint nod. "Guess you're seeing one now." They shook hands. Walt's grip was strong but hesitant, the kind of handshake that measures how much a man is willing to reveal. Jack motioned toward the field stretching behind his house. "You worked with my uncle, didn't you, back when he still had the place running?" Walt's expression shifted, the corners of his mouth tightening. "Worked is one word for it," he said, then looked past Jack toward the distant sunflowers that weren't there anymore. Bob was stubborn. Smart, too smart for a farmer sometimes. Always tinkering with things that didn't need tinkering. Jack frowned. "I found some of his notes. Something about samples contamination. You know anything about that?" The old man's hand paused mid-wipe. He looked at Jack for a long time before setting the rag down on the railing. "Son," he said, "you don't want to go digging where he left off. Some things are better left under the dirt." Scout gave a soft growl, breaking the stillness. Walt's eyes flicked toward the dog, then back to Jack. "You got your uncle's look, you know that. The same eyes when he wouldn't quit asking questions." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to understand what happened here. The field's dead, the well's dry, and I keep finding pieces that don't fit." Walt exhaled through his nose, a sound like air escaping from an old tire. "All right," he said quietly. "You deserve to know some of it." He gestured toward the bench on the porch and they both sat. The boards creaked beneath their weight. "Your uncle signed on with a private research outfit out of Wichita." Walt began. "They said they were studying how to clean up farmland that got poisoned by old pesticides." Sounded noble enough. He was proud to be part of it. Jack nodded slowly. What went wrong? Walt's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the clouds hung low, heavy with unfallen rain. After the first year, the plants started to wilt. Not just here, every test site they had. They said it was a bad batch of chemicals, but we knew better. One of the technicians collapsed out there in the south lot, never got back up. Jack's stomach tightened. "You're saying someone died?" Walt nodded, eyes dull. "Young fella, barely 30. They said it was heat stroke, but Bob knew it wasn't." A week later, men from the company took everything, samples, reports, even the pumps. Told him the project was canceled and to keep quiet. They paid him off to stay silent. The old man leaned back the porch, groaning under his boots. He wouldn't talk about it after that. Wouldn't let anyone near the well, either. Said the water was sick. Jack felt the wind pick up, brushing against his neck like a warning. "Did you help him sign the contract?" he asked quietly. Walt hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I thought it was a good deal. We all did. The government had programs back then for testing soil cleanup. Nobody thought it would turn bad." He looked at his cracked hands. Bob tried to fix it, but the damage was done. For a long moment, the only sound was the creaking of the windmill. Jack stood, his shoulders heavy with the weight of another man's regret. "Thanks for telling me," he said. Walt didn't look up. "Be careful, son," he murmured. "There's more buried out there than bones." Jack started back down the dirt road, Scout padding close. The sun dipped behind the low hills and shadows stretched across the field. He stopped at the fence line and looked out over his land. Dry, colorless a memory turned to dust. He crouched near the small patch where he had planted the seeds days ago. The soil was cracked, again the faintest imprint of his own boot crossing it. Not a single sprout had pushed through. Scout circled once, then lay down beside him, nose brushing the ground. "Nothing yet," Jack said softly. The dog pawed at the dirt, turning it over with quiet insistence. Jack reached for the canteen hanging from his belt, poured a thin stream of water over the small mound. The ground drank it greedily, leaving no trace. "All right," he whispered, "we'll try again tomorrow." He stayed there until dusk melted into night, the wind moving through the dead stalks like a breath trying to find its way home. By the third week, the days had grown warmer. Jack's palms were rough from shoveling, his shoulders tight from the rhythm of useless work, digging trenches for a field that refused to breathe. The old pump had given up more dust than water, and the only sound that broke the quiet was Scout's low bark whenever a truck passed the road. On that afternoon, one finally stopped. A silver SUV rolled up to the gate, clean and too new for a place that smelled of rust and dry weeds. A woman stepped out, adjusting her sunglasses against the glare. She wore a tan field jacket and boots that looked practical enough to belong to someone who worked in dirt, but there was a precision to her movements, trained, measured. "Mr. Harlan," she called. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans, wary. "That's me." She approached, extending a card. "Linda Carver, Environmental Engineer, AgriSun Corp." "I'm here on behalf of AgriSun," she said. "We're evaluating sites for a solar project, and your property happens to be ideal for panel placement." Jack frowned, glancing toward the barren acres behind him. "You want to build solar panels on dead land?" She smiled faintly. "Dead land doesn't stay dead when you know how to use it." Her tone was too smooth, too careful. Jack folded the card in half, pocketed it, and motioned toward the porch. "You want to talk here?" She nodded, following him up the steps. Scout watched her from near the door, ears hightail still. Linda sat crossing her legs, pulling a folder from her bag. "I'll be honest," she said, "this land's contaminated, but our project can repurpose it without disturbing the soil." Jack leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "You seem to know a lot about my land for someone who's never set foot on it." She hesitated, then opened the folder. "Because AgriSun has access to state environmental records." She slid a page toward him. The header read, "Soil Composition Report 2000." The numbers below meant nothing to Jack, but the words beside them did. Atrazine concentration 64 ppm. Linda looked up. "That's 40 times the legal limit." Jack felt the muscles in his neck tighten. He knew that word, atrazine. It had been painted on barrels stacked behind his uncle's barn decades ago, bright green letters fading under sun and dust. "That's a weed killer," he said. "Banned now." Linda nodded. "Yes, but long before that it was used in large-scale crop management. It binds to soil and groundwater. Once it's in, it doesn't leave easily." Jack stared at the report, the black ink blurring under his gaze. "You think my uncle did this? I don't know," she replied softly. "I only know the contamination spread from here outward, not inward. That suggests the source started on site." She paused. "Look, Mr. Harlan, this isn't about blame. If you sell, we can clean the surface, cap the wells, and build something new. It would save you the trouble." Jack's eyes flicked to Scout, who had moved closer, the low rumble in his throat rising. "The trouble is, I don't bury what I don't understand." Linda met his gaze steady. "Then maybe you should understand how bad it really is." She closed the folder, left it on the porch table, and stood. "You have my number." When she walked back to the SUV, Scout followed a few steps, hackles raised. The vehicle rolled away in silence, leaving behind only the whisper of gravel under tires. Jack sat for a long while, the folder untouched. He finally opened it again, running his finger down the list of data, until he stopped at a signature at the bottom, Robert Harlan. His uncle's name. The report wasn't just government record, it had been filed by him. Jack's chest went cold. The old man hadn't just known about the contamination. He documented it. He looked out over the land again, the sun dipping low, turning the empty field into an ocean of bronze light. "You worked for them," he murmured. "And maybe you tried to fix what you helped break." The thought stung. He remembered the smell of his uncle's workshop chemical sharpness mixed with oil and earth. The barrels, the gloves, the meticulous way he sealed everything. It wasn't secrecy, it was guilt. When the light faded, Jack went to the barn and found the sack of old sunflower seeds on the shelf. The canvas was torn, the print barely legible, but when he opened it, a handful of seeds spilled into his palm, dry and small, but still whole. He fetched a rag, wiped each one clean of dust, laid them out on the workbench. Scout watched from the doorway, head-tilted eyes reflecting the lantern light. "You think these things remember sunlight?" Jack asked. The dog blinked slowly as if listening. Jack filled a tin cup with water from the gutter bucket, the kind that had caught the last drizzle from the night before. He let the seeds soak there one by one until they sank. "If the poison killed the flowers," he said softly, "then maybe it killed him too." He turned toward the field, the darkness stretching wide and empty, and carried the cup out into the wind. Along the fence line he knelt, pressed each seed into the damp soil, careful, deliberate, as though planting a confession only the earth would understand. Scout settled beside him, paws on the dirt ears twitching with the rhythm of the wind that never seemed to rest. By the next week, Jack's mind had turned into a restless machine. He couldn't stop thinking about the report Linda had shown him, the signature of his uncle at the bottom of the page. The image followed him like a ghost every time he looked out over the field. The seeds he planted hadn't sprouted, but every morning he still walked the rows carrying a bucket of water and a faint hope. Scout followed close behind, quiet except for the soft pat of his paws. When the mail truck passed without stopping, Jack realized he hadn't spoken to another soul in days. That evening, under the yellow light of the kitchen lamp, he reached for his phone and scrolled through old contacts until he found a name that still meant trust. Tom Reyes, an old friend from his unit who now worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Jack hesitated, then dialed. Harlan Tom answered, voice warm with recognition. "You still alive out there, barely?" Jack said with a faint smile. "I need a favor." Tom chuckled. "That usually means trouble." "What kind?" Jack explained the field, the chemicals, the folder, and the strange history behind his uncle's name. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "You said the company was Agrisun?" Tom asked finally. "Yeah, but I think they used to go by another name. My uncle worked for them in the 90s, and now they're back trying to buy his land." Papers shuffled in the background. "Give me a few days," Tom said. "If they were tied to any government projects, I'll find something." For the first time in weeks, Jack felt something like purpose. He spent the next few days fixing fences and cleaning the barn. Scout trailed him everywhere, pausing now and then to dig in the dirt near the fence line where the new seeds lay buried. On the fourth evening, the phone rang again. Jack Tom said, his tone different this time, focused low. "You were right. Your uncle wasn't just a farmer. He had a subcontract through a Defense Department program called Agri-Tech Restoration Initiative. It was shut down around 1999 officially for budget reasons." Jack frowned. "What kind of program?" "Experimental soil remediation," Tom said. They were testing ways to use plants to remove toxins from contaminated military land. Phytoremediation, it's called. Your uncle's field was one of the pilot sites. Jack gripped the phone tighter. "You mean this place exactly that? There's mention of a sunflower variant designed to absorb atrazine and nitrogen compounds. The project worked, sort of, but it was classified because it uncovered contamination linked to private contractors. Your uncle was one of them." The words hung heavy. Jack felt his chest tighten. He was cleaning up their mess, he said quietly. "Looks that way," Tom replied. "And when they pulled the plug, they made it look like he'd been part of the problem. Can you send me what you found? I'll try, but most of it's still restricted. Jack, whatever you do, be careful. If that company's still around under a new name, they won't like someone digging into this." After the call ended, Jack sat in silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a heartbeat. Scout lay at his feet, chin on his paws, eyes following him as he stood and crossed to the cupboard. He took out his uncle's old notebook, the same one he'd found in the metal box. The handwriting looked steadier now, as though time had softened its edges. He turned to the middle pages, scanning the columns of data until a small paragraph caught his eye. Soil amendment test combined sunflower roots with calcium peroxide moisture retention at 14% optimal pH 6.7. Underneath it, a note in smaller script. May take years. Be patient with the land. Jack traced the words with his thumb, his throat tightening. For a long while, he didn't move. Then he reached for his own pen, and in the space below his uncle's final entry, he wrote, "Maybe the best way to forget a war is to make something grow." He closed the book slowly, the weight of it familiar now, almost comforting. The storm clouds that had been gathering all day finally broke outside, tapping against the windows in soft, rhythmic bursts. Jack walked to the door, opened it, and let the smell of rain roll in. The air was cooler, cleaner. Scout trotted out first nose to the ground, tail flicking with energy. Jack stepped onto the porch, lifting his face to the rain, feeling it run through the lines of dirt on his skin. "All right, Uncle," he said quietly. "Let's see if you were right." He looked toward the field where the first seeds still slept, the raindrops making tiny craters in the dust. Somewhere beneath that surface was proof of failure of faith, or maybe both, and for the first time Jack felt ready to find out which one it would be. The next morning dawned gray and cool, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. Jack sat at the kitchen table with his uncle's notebook open and his laptop glowing dimly beside it. He had spent half the night cross-referencing the name SunClean 97 from the margins of one of the notes. The term had appeared again and again, usually next to numbers and dates. It had to mean something. He typed it into the search bar, adding Soil Research Institute, and waited. The results came up empty. He tried again, this time digging through archived academic databases. Nothing. Finally, he found a contact email for the National Soil Research Institute in Illinois. His message was simple and polite, requesting records or publications related to Project SunClean 97 possibly conducted between 1996-2000 associated with Robert Harlan. He sent it, closed the laptop, and stared out at the field until the light changed. When the reply came the next afternoon, it was short enough to fit in a breath. No record of such a project exists within our archives. Jack read it 3 times, his jaw tightening a little more with each pass. It wasn't just that the file didn't exist, it was that it had been erased. Scout, sensing his mood, rested his head against Jack's leg. "They buried it," Jack muttered. "Just like everything else." He pushed away from the table and walked toward the barn, the one place that still smelled like his uncle oil dust and iron. The door moaned open, letting in a shaft of late light. He began sorting through the old shelves, prying open boxes filled with rusted tools and cracked jars. Scout nosed through a pile of burlap sacks near the back, his tail stiffening. Then came the sound claws scraping against wood, a muffled thud, and a short bark that carried both excitement and warning. "What is it?" Jack crouched beside him. Scout had unearthed something under the floorboards, a small metal crate wedged between beams. Jack fetched a crowbar, pried the boards loose, and lifted the crate into the light. The lid bore faint lettering that read Property of National Soil Research Institute. Uncle Bob must have kept one of the supply crates before the project was shut down, holding onto the only physical proof they couldn't erase from the system. Inside, cushioned in layers of old cloth, were glass vials sealed with wax. Each one carried a label marked with dates and coordinates, the handwriting unmistakably his uncle's. "Well, I'll be," Jack whispered. The labels read Sample A, Southfield water sample, B, control soil, Sample C, well source. He unscrewed one, slowly holding it to the light. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, amber, viscous, and unnatural. Even sealed for years, it carried a faint chemical tang. Scout sniffed once and backed away, whining low. Jack's stomach turned. He dipped a test strip into the liquid. Within seconds, it turned deep red. He checked the chart on the side of the kit. 40 times the safe limit, he murmured. The contamination wasn't in the soil, it was in the water. His uncle hadn't been fighting bad land. He'd been fighting poisoned veins beneath it. Jack leaned back against the wall, the realization washing over him with the weight of years. The well hadn't died, it had been murdered. He sat there for a while, the quiet of the barn thick around him, before rising with a new resolve. That night, under a thin moon, he rolled the old hand pump out from the shed and set it near the well. The pipes groaned as he connected them, rust flaking off in small red bursts. He poured water from the bucket into the top, priming the pump, and began to work the handle. The mechanism resisted at first, then loosened with a metallic sigh. A trickle of dark water spat out, followed by a steady stream black as ink. He let it run into a trough until it cleared to a murky brown, then again until it turned gray. He waited, listening to the rhythmic wheeze of the pump, a sound that felt like breathing after years of silence. Scout lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes following the motion with steady calm. When the water finally lightened to a pale yellow, Jack stopped. He fetched a clean bucket, filled it, and let it sit overnight to settle. The next morning, he skimmed the surface with a spoon, removing the thin film of residue that had risen to the top. He carried the bucket to the edge of the field and poured it gently over the patch of seeds along the fence. The soil soaked it in without protest, the surface darkening slightly in the early light. "If the water comes back to life," Jack said quietly. "Watching the damp earth glisten, the flowers will follow." He returned to the well, gripped the pump handle again, and began another round, low steady. Each pull, releasing a breath the land seemed to have held for too long. The rhythm filled the air like an old song, the kind that carries both work and faith in equal measure. Scout's ears flicked at the sound, then he settled his breathing, matching the cadence of the pump as the first rays of morning spilled across the silent field. Jack drove into town early that morning, the horizon just beginning to pale. His hands were rough-stained with soil, his nails rimmed in rust from the well pump. Scout sat in the passenger seat, silent, his head against the window, eyes fixed on the endless fields rolling by. Jack hadn't planned on confronting anyone yet, but the lies had built up too high to ignore. He parked in front of the county environmental office, a square concrete building that looked as joyless as the sky above it. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over empty desks until a familiar voice called from the far end. Mr. Harlan Linda said, stepping out of a side conference room where Agrisun had been meeting with county staff. Her hair was tied back this time, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She looked surprised to see him, but not entirely unprepared. "You've been busy," she said carefully. Jack nodded once. "I've been cleaning." He handed her a folder, its edges smudged with fingerprints. "Found these under the barn floorboards. Samples. Labels from the National Soil Research Institute. You want to tell me why your company pretends they don't exist?" Linda looked down at the folder, her face unreadable. "Where did you find them?" "In my uncle's barn," Jack said. "Same place he kept the only clean water left in this county." She exhaled slowly, motioning him inside. Once the door closed, the room seemed smaller, the air heavier. "You need to understand something," she said quietly. "Agrisun isn't just a solar developer, it's a subsidiary of GenCorp Industries." Jack froze at the name. He hadn't heard it in years, not since he wore a uniform and carried a badge instead of a shovel. GenCorp Chemical Manufacturing Government contracts private security. He had worked for them once, after leaving the service guarding warehouse sites he was told were environmentally sensitive. "I used to work for them," he said slowly. Linda nodded. "I know, I checked." Her eyes softened. "Your uncle worked there too. Different division. Back when they were developing herbicides for the military." Jack felt his stomach twist. "Atrazine," he whispered. Linda opened a drawer, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and placed it between them. The edges were yellowed, the header faint but legible, internal memo confidential. Across the middle in bold type were the words "Terminate Sunfield case. Liability risk too high." Jack's eyes scanned the rest, references to potential groundwater exposure, unauthorized storage of test materials, recommend containment through acquisition. He looked up at her. You're trying to buy the land to bury it again." She hesitated, then nodded. "I don't make those decisions, Jack, but I know what they're doing. So why tell me?" he asked, voice low. She leaned back, folding her arms. "Because I grew up near a field like this one. My father worked the soil until it stopped giving back. I joined AgriSun because I thought maybe I could fix something from the inside. But this project was never about fixing. They were only trying to cover their liability." She gestured to the memo. "This isn't fixing, it's silencing." Jack felt the weight of his past pressing in. He had stood guard outside warehouses labeled restricted, unaware he was protecting the very people who poisoned the ground his uncle had tried to heal. "I spent years defending them," he said bitterly. "Didn't even know what I was keeping safe." Linda's gaze softened. "You didn't know, now you do. The question is, what will you do with it?" The air in the room seemed to thicken. Jack's mind flashed back to the field, the water pump wheezing the soil, darkening the seeds buried deep under the surface. "I'll finish what he started," he said finally. Linda nodded once, then reached for her bag. "There's something you might want." From inside, she pulled a small envelope and slid it across the desk. "These are sunflower seeds," she said, "from the original phytoremediation strain used in SunClean 97. I kept a few samples in the lab freezer. They're clean, viable." Jack stared at the envelope in silence. "Why give them to me?" "Because they deserve another chance," she said simply. "And so do you." He took it carefully, feeling the soft rattle of seeds inside. Scout shifted by the door, sensing movement, his tail thumping once against the wall. Linda walked him out, stopping at the steps. "You're fighting a giant, Jack. Sometimes all it takes is one stubborn field." He nodded, sliding the envelope into his jacket pocket. "I fought bigger things than that." On the drive home, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The light stretched across the dead rows, painting them in gold that felt almost alive. Jack, parked by the barn, opened the envelope and let the seeds fall into his palm. They were smaller than he expected, fragile, almost weightless. "These are clean," he said to Scout. "You're kind of honest." That night, under a sky clear enough to see the faint outline of the Milky Way, Jack planted the new seeds in a circle around the well. The soil was damp from his earlier work breathing again after years of silence. As he pressed each seed into the earth, Scout lay nearby watching. This time, Jack said softly, "We let the ground speak for itself." The wind stirred the grass, carrying his words out into the dark. 2 days after meeting Linda, Jack made his move. The envelope with the clean sunflower seeds sat on the table beside a stack of papers, the samples, the test strips, and the printed copy of the facts she had shown him. The night before, he had written a letter to the Flat County Gazette, the small but stubborn local paper that still printed truth when bigger ones wouldn't. He attached everything, every note, every number, every photograph, and signed it with a hand that didn't shake. By sunrise, the email was sent and a copy of the files was stored in 3 different drives hidden across the farm. Scout watched him from the porch as he worked, ears perked, tail still. "We'll see if the world listens this time," Jack murmured. The first response came sooner than expected. The editor called within a day, cautious but intrigued. "Mr. Harlan, are you aware of what you're accusing?" "I'm not accusing," Jack said. "I'm proving." After that silence. Then the air changed. Small things at first. His mailbox left open tire tracks on the dirt road that didn't belong to him. The third night, Scout woke him with a sharp bark of her bristling growl, low and steady. Jack grabbed the flashlight and rifle, stepped out into the cold. The field was silent, the sky black, except for a thin crescent moon. He scanned the rows of soil, saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched stayed with him. By morning, the unease had turned into proof. As he crouched by the truck to check the undercarriage, Scout barked again and scratched at the rear bumper. Jack leaned in closer and froze. Taped near the exhaust was a small black device with a blinking red light. A transmitter. Someone had been listening. He pried it off carefully, crushed it under his boot, then carried the pieces to the kitchen table. "Looks like we made the right people nervous," he said to Scout, who wagged his tail once but didn't relax. That night, he decided to set his own trap. He installed a motion-activated camera facing the barn, another near the well. He waited while the wind howled through the empty fields. Around midnight, Scout growled again, head snapping toward the barn. Jack peeked through the window. Two silhouettes moved in the dark, flashlights cutting through the mist. They weren't farmers. He let them step closer, watched as one pried at the barn door while the other stood guard. The beam of their light passed over the corner where the crate of samples had been buried again under hay. Jack's hand tightened around the camera remote. When the door creaked open, he pressed record. The lens caught everything. The faces half lit the logo on their jackets, AgriSun Environmental Response Team. The taller man knelt lifting the crate, then froze when Scout barked a sound so deep it split the night. Jack stepped out with the flashlight high and his voice calm. "You lost." The men turned and ran, their boots hammering the dirt as they disappeared toward the road. Scout chased just far enough to make sure they didn't stop. Jack checked the camera feed. Every frame was clear. He sent the footage to the sheriff's office the next morning. By afternoon, he had his answer. Mr. Harlan, the deputy, said over the phone, his tone rehearsed. "We reviewed the footage, but because the company is claiming they were retrieving corporate environmental materials from a site they once serviced, the county attorney says this falls under a civil property dispute, not a criminal trespass." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. They broke in. "Technically, they didn't cause damage," the deputy replied. "Best you talk to a lawyer." The line went dead. Jack stood there for a long moment, the quiet pressing against his ribs. He turned toward the window where the field stretched beyond sight, his reflection faint against the glass. "We're on our own," he said to Scout. The dog's tail flicked once in response, and so Jack did what soldiers do when command falls silent. He took control. He cataloged everything, every label, every timestamp, every serial number from the samples. He photographed the tracks in the dirt where the intruders had run the scratches on the barn door, the fragments of tape left on his truck. He stored them in an old ammo box beneath the floorboards. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory against something too big to see. But amid the tension, something else began to shift. When dawn came, he walked to the well to pump another round of water. The handle gave easier now, the resistance softer, as if the earth was loosening its grip. He filled the bucket, carried it to the edge of the field, and poured it slowly across the circle of new seeds. The soil drank deeply darker, now warmer, under his hand. Scout sat at the edge, alert, ears forward. As the first light crept over the horizon, Jack saw it, a single thin green line pushing through the dirt, fragile and defiant. A second chute struggled nearby, slower, as if testing whether the ground was safe. It wasn't a field yet, but it was proof the soil was finally listening. "Look at that," he whispered. Scout tilted his head, tail wagging gently. For the first time in 5 years, the field wasn't just brown and dead. It was alive, if only in hints. The morning wind carried the scent of wet soil, and Jack felt something stir inside him, a quiet belief that maybe the land was answering after all. The news broke quietly. Buried halfway down the second page of the Flat County Gazette, veteran questions AgriSun land practices. There were no photos, no bold letters, just a paragraph that hinted at something larger. Jack knew it wasn't much, but it was enough. Someone somewhere had read it, and that meant the silence was cracking. That morning, he found Linda waiting by her truck at the edge of the field. Wind lifting her hair as she studied the horizon. "You shouldn't be here," Jack said. "Neither should you," she replied with a half smile. She looked thin or tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle you can't name out loud. "I saw the paper," she said softly. "You stirred the nest. They came for the samples," Jack said. "I've got proof." He handed her a photograph of the two men caught on camera. She nodded grimly. "They'll deny everything. But if the contamination's still measurable, that's our way in. Let me help." Together, they spent the morning marking zones across the field. Jack watched as she collected samples, carefully driving small metal cores into the soil, twisting, pulling, sealing the tubes with practiced precision. Scout trailed behind them, tail swishing occasionally, sniffing the freshly dug earth before moving to the next patch. When they reached the center of the field, the part that had started to show new growth, Linda crouched, brushed the surface with her hand and frowned. "It smells cleaner," she murmured. "Like the chemical trace isn't as strong." Jack knelt beside her, scooping a handful of soil. It crumbled easily, dark and cool, nothing like the chalky dust it used to be. "This is where my uncle planted the first rows," he said quietly. He called it the test bed. They sent the samples overnight to an independent lab in Colorado. For 2 days, Jack hardly slept. He fixed the pump again, reinforced the fence line, replaced the light bulb on the porch that kept flickering. Each time he felt the pull of exhaustion, he'd look out at the small green sprouts and remember. On the third morning, Linda's call came before sunrise. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling with something between disbelief and joy. "I got the results. You need to see this." She drove out an hour later, dust trailing behind her tires, and handed him the report. He scanned it line by line, the numbers coming into focus: atrazine levels center field 8 ppm, outer edges 42 ppm. He looked up, stunned. "It's lower. By a lot. Drastically lower," she said, her eyes shining. "Whatever was planted here is filtering the toxins. The roots are pulling it out of the soil. Your uncle's project worked." The words hit him harder than he expected. For years, the field had been a graveyard, a symbol of failure, and now it was something else, a living cure. Jack swallowed hard. "He did it," he whispered. "He actually did it." Linda nodded. He was ahead of his time. He didn't hide the contamination, he fought it. Jack turned the report over in his hands, noticing the faint smudge of soil on his own thumb. Then we finished what he started. That night, after Linda left, Jack went into the house and pulled the old film reel from its tin case. He threaded it through the projector he'd repaired earlier that month and watched as the wall flickered to life. The images danced in ghostly motion, his uncle standing among rows of tall sunflowers, their heads bent under the weight of late summer light. Behind him, men adjusted instruments, the same kind Jack had seen in the photos before. Then, near the end of the reel, his uncle appeared alone, writing on a chalkboard propped against the back of a truck. The words were faint, but visible. "If we can't clean the world, we can at least start with one field." Jack paused the frame, staring at the sentence until his chest ached. Scout sat nearby, his eyes reflecting the pale light. "He never gave up," Jack said softly. The dog tilted his head, listening as if understanding. The next morning, Jack walked out into the cool dawn carrying the last of the seed bag. The air smelled faintly of rain, and something sweeter, the promise of renewal. He planted outward from the clean center, each handful of seeds slipping through his fingers like small acts of penance. Scout raced ahead, barking at the crows that swooped low, scattering them with bursts of energy. Jack smiled faintly. "Good boy," he said. By midday, the field was lined again, straight-ordered alive with the rhythm of hope. When the wind rose, it carried dust that no longer smelled like chemicals but like earth finally breathing again. Jack stood in the middle of it, his palms black with soil, and for the first time since he'd come home, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt sacred. When the report from the independent lab went public, it spread faster than Jack expected. Within a few weeks, the Flat County Gazette had been picked up by a national environmental news site, and from there it made its way into the hands of state regulators. Jack didn't watch the television coverage. He didn't like seeing strangers argue about his uncle's field as if it were a business transaction. Instead, he spent his mornings the same way he always had, watering the young sunflowers, repairing the fences, and keeping the field alive. Scout followed at his side, his fur catching the light of early summer. But the world beyond the field had changed. A letter from the Department of Agriculture arrived one Tuesday, marked urgent. They were reopening the investigation into GenCorp and its subsidiary AgriSun. Within weeks, inspectors arrived, men and women in clean boots and heavy gloves, taking samples, photographing the land, questioning locals. Jack stayed out of their way, answering only when spoken to. "This is where it started," he told them, quietly pointing toward the center of the field where the soil had first turned dark again. When the findings were released, they confirmed everything. GenCorp had dumped waste into the aquifer, falsified data, and silenced internal projects like SunClean 97 to avoid accountability. The company was fined heavily, its assets seized, and part of the restitution fund was ordered to go towards soil restoration and community health programs in Kansas. They called it justice. Jack called it a beginning. Weeks later, Linda returned. She looked different, freer somehow, like someone who had finally stopped running from herself. She had left Agrisun for good, the badge and the burden both gone. She found Jack at the well, shirt rolled to his elbows, palms stained dark from earth. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, he did. We just finished the job." Linda reached into her bag and handed him an envelope. "This came across my desk before I left Agrisun. They never filed it officially. It's the original report." Jack opened it carefully, the pages yellowed, the heading faint but readable, SunClean 97 Final Phase Results. His eyes caught on the bottom corner his uncle's signature, strong and deliberate. Below it, in handwritten blue ink, were the words, "Pass it to Jack if he ever comes home." Linda explained that the report had never been formally filed into the public archive, so the handwritten note stayed attached and was forgotten in an internal folder. The world seemed to still. Jack ran his thumb over the handwriting, his throat tightening. He knew he whispered. Linda nodded. "He believed you'd come back, that you'd understand what this land was meant for." Jack folded the pages back into the envelope and looked out over the field. The rows of sunflowers were taller now, some nearly waist-high, their green leaves unfurling toward the sky. "Then, I guess it's time to give it a new purpose," he said. Months passed. The settlement money came through not as much as the headlines promised, but enough. Jack used every cent to establish what he called the Sunfield Veterans Garden. The old barn was rebuilt, the fences repaired, and cabins added for those who came seeking peace from battles that never quite ended. Veterans arrived one by one, men and women carrying invisible burdens, each of them finding something sacred in the act of planting. They worked the soil, tended sunflowers, and shared quiet evenings by the fire, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent. Jack didn't call himself their leader, he was just the keeper of the field. Scout became the silent guardian, always nearby, watching the new arrivals as if he understood that healing had its own rhythm. Late one afternoon, as the sky turned gold, the repair crew finished fixing the old well. Jack stood beside them waiting for the first pull of the new pump. When the water burst upward, clear and cold, Scout barked sharply, circling the well with his tail wagging. Jack leaned over and stared down. The reflection shimmered back his face, the open sky, and just at the edge of the circle, a single sunflower bent toward the light, its petals glinting like fire. The water rippled, turning gold beneath it. "You see that, boy?" Jack murmured. Scout barked again, pawing at the stone. Jack smiled, the kind that reached the eyes, soft and worn by time. "We did it, didn't we?" He sat at the well's edge, the smell of wet soil thick in the air. The field stretched before him, alive now, in full bloom, waves of yellow bending with the wind. He took the envelope with the report from his pocket, ran his hand across his uncle's name once more, and whispered, "The land forgave you." Scout pressed closer, resting his head on Jack's knee. The wind swept across the sunflowers, carrying their rustling leaves like whispers through the field, soundless words of relief, of return of peace finally earned. Jack tilted his head back, eyes closing as the sunlight warmed his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of war or debt or loss. He felt the pulse of something whole again. Somewhere, deep beneath the ground, the well gurgled, drawing clean water through roots that reached for the surface. Above it, the first flower bloomed fully at the well's mouth, golden and unbroken, a symbol of forgiveness made flesh. Scout lifted his head and watched it sway, the earth breathing with them as generations came to rest at last. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more. Which moment stayed with you the most, the hidden truth or the first bloom by the well? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.